Nothing truly says summer than some fresh picked strawberries. Our strawberry patch gave us a lovely harvest of strawberries this year, and I found some absolutely delicious recipes to incorporate them in. So if you are looking for some really delicious desserts to put your fresh strawberries in, I have 3 of the best that I am going to share with you, and I promise you are going to want to make every one of these. If you've been following my channel, I have been working a lot with sourdough lately, and I have a lot of sourdough starter, so I'm always looking for some new recipes to use that sourdough in. I have done a lot of sourdough cinnamon rolls or sourdough maple cinnamon rolls in the past, and they have turned out really, really well. I actually prefer sourdough rolls to regular rolls, as I think they are just so much moister. And then I came across this recipe for a sourdough strawberry roll, and I knew I had to try it. In one bowl, I mixed 650 grams of all-purpose flour and 100 grams of sugar, and then I put it aside. And then in a separate bowl, I add 310 grams of milk, 200 grams of active sourdough starter, 1 large egg, and in this bowl, I'm supposed to be mixing in 57 grams of melted butter. So for you're going to want to make sure you melt it and then remember to get it out of the microwave or the pot and put it in here. Unfortunately, I forgot my melted butter in the microwave after melting it. I was promising my son that I'd take him to a free swim that we had in town, and he was quite anxious to go. So I was kind of rushing through this step and unfortunately forgot the butter. That being said, at the very end, we didn't notice a difference with the butter not in the recipe. They were still delicious and moist. So after getting the dry ingredients mixed in with the wet ingredients, you're going to knead for about 3 to 5 minutes until it is nicely an elastic ball that pulls away from the bowl. I add in a little extra flour because it is quite moist. It's very humid in my area right now. So I did add some extra flour. Then I just add this to an oiled bowl and cover it in saran wrap. Now the recipe had said to leave it for 8 to 12 hours to rise. I found this not necessary. It's quite warm where we were, so I left it for about 6 hours to rise and they turned out just fine. So I think that's highly dependent on how warm your climate is or how warm your house is, how long you need to let it rise for. This recipe also calls for strawberry jam. Now, if you have strawberry jam already made in your house, you are welcome to use that. For me, I did have these beautiful fresh strawberries to use up, so I wanted to use those. So I start off with a pound of fresh strawberries, and I'm just taking the tops off of those and having them. You'll notice that I do keep the tops in all of my recipes because I go ahead and make strawberry scrap vinegar with these. You can also keep these. I've made strawberry lemonade with these as well, and they just have so many uses besides just throwing them in the compost. So make sure you are keeping your strawberry tops. Once your strawberries are all cut up, you can add 3/4 of a cup of sugar and about a tablespoon of lemon juice. And then you can go ahead and get that simmering on your stove. I use a potato masher just to mash down my fruit and get those juices out. Now, you don't necessarily need to use pectin in that jam. You can just boil it down for about 20 minutes until it's nice and thick. Or if you like, you can use a nice fresh apple pectin and use about a tablespoon in there. After your dough is risen to about double its height, you can take it out onto a floured surface and roll it out into a nice rectangle about 1/4 of an inch thick. I make sure I flour the top of mine just to keep it from being sticky while I'm rolling it out. Once your dough is nicely rolled out, you can go ahead and spread this jam all over the top. Now, I was afraid that I wasn't going to have quite enough jam, but it was just perfect for what I needed here. If you want, you can also dice up some fresh strawberries and put in here. However, I was a little worried that while I was rolling it up, those fresh strawberries might get in the way a little bit, so I just used the jam. Once that is spread evenly over your dough, you can go ahead and start rolling it up tightly from the top. Some people like to cut it here in strips and then roll individually, but I find it's just fine to start rolling it up and in one big dough and then just cut it at the ends. I would typically cut these into 12 even pieces. However, with this jam, the dough was also very moist, and I was afraid cutting them any smaller that the jam would just kind of squish out everywhere. So I did 9 pieces. These made for some pretty big strawberry rolls, but that's fine. We just cut them in half at the end if we want a smaller roll. So you could try cutting them into smaller rolls. However, for my dough and strawberry filling, I was just afraid that it would squish everywhere, so I did a bit bigger rolls. Also, remember to thoroughly butter your pan to keep them from sticking. Once they are fully arranged in your pan, I go ahead and cover it with the same saran wrap that I used on my bowl, and then I also put a towel over them, and I leave them to rise for another 1 to 2 hours. Once they have finished rising, you can bake them at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 to 30 minutes until they are slightly brown on top. To say these are delicious is an understatement. These were so good. Our favorite rolls by far. I will forever make sourdough rolls from now on. Even if you are not a fan of cinnamon rolls, I highly suggest you try these because they are so different from a cinnamon roll and they are just so decadent and delicious. The next dessert recipe I highly suggest you try is a sourdough strawberry scone. So again, I love using up my sourdough, and this was a great way to use it. Now, if you're thinking, oh, I know about scones, they're often dry and very crumbly. This may be true for other scones, but not for these ones. These were so moist and so delicious. So I start off by taking 1 cup of chopped strawberries. You chop them into about 1/4 inch pieces. And then into a large bowl, you are going to add 2 cups of all-purpose flour, 1/2 cup of sugar, a teaspoon of baking soda, a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and then you're just going to mix that all together. Now, the recipe did call to have frozen butter grated into this. However, it's quite warm where we are, and I don't keep my butter in the refrigerator, so It was fairly soft, and I figured I could just cut this up just like a pie crust recipe. So that's what I did, and this turned out perfectly fine. So if you do not have frozen butter to grate into your flour mixture, that is quite all right. You can just use a pastry cutter to cut it up into about pea-sized pieces. To this mixture, you are going to add in your 1 cup of diced strawberries and mix them in until they are thoroughly coated in the flour mixture. In a separate bowl, you're going to add 1/3 cup of milk, 1.5 teaspoon of lemon zest. I didn't really measure mine. I just grated in the skin of 1 lemon, and that was perfectly fine. The zing of lemon that you get in these scones is really fresh and really nice. To this bowl, you're going to add 1/2 cup of sourdough starter and just mix it in. You'll also add in 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Once that is thoroughly mixed in, you can go ahead and add your wet mixture to your dry mixture and mix it all up until it is thoroughly combined. I did end up adding a little extra flour to mine until it was a bit more of a softer elastic dough. Otherwise, it would have been entirely too moist to cut. So after I have it into a firm elastic dough, I add it to a floured parchment sheet and I just press it down until it's about 1 inch thick, and I cut it into 8 even slices. Then you'll want to arrange these neatly on a lined baking sheet. Leave a little bit of room between them because they will grow a little bit while they're baking. You will get these into your oven and bake them on 425 Fahrenheit for 5 minutes, and then reduce the heat down to 375 for 10 to 12 minutes until they are lightly brown on top. While those are baking, you can go ahead and get a glaze done for these. You can take 1 tablespoon of melted butter, 1/2 tablespoon of water, 1 teaspoon of vanilla, and 2/3 cup of powdered sugar. You just get them in a bowl and mix them all together, and it will come together as a lovely thick glaze that you can just put on in a drizzle on top of these scones. These were so delicious, and I know some people use scones as a breakfast idea, but for us this was such a lovely dessert. It was my mother's 73rd birthday yesterday, and she loves all things strawberry and whipped cream. So I decided for her birthday that I would make her a strawberry shortcake. And this was her absolute favorite cake. She loved it. But this cake is not just for birthdays. It could be made for any summer occasion. It is so fresh and so light and so delicious. In one bowl, I start off with 3 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 tablespoon of baking powder. I mix those together and set that bowl aside. In another bowl, I take 1.5 cups of sugar and 3/4 cup of unsalted butter, and I start mashing those together until they're fairly well combined. Now I start off with 2 eggs, and then I mix them thoroughly in with the butter and sugar. And then after that, I take 2 more eggs and also mix them in. So 4 eggs in total. If you are looking for any of these recipes, make sure you check out my description box. I will have them all listed for you there. Once that is thoroughly mixed in, I take 1/4 cup of oil. I'm using olive oil here. I add that along with 1/4 cup of sour cream. Then I get that thoroughly mixed together. Now I am using 1 cup of whole milk, but I'm only going to use half of that here and then add in half of the flour mixture and mix it together. And then after that, I will add the other half of the milk and the other half of the flour mixture until they are thoroughly combined. You're then going to take your oiled cake pans. I am using 3, and you evenly distribute the batter to your 3 cake pans. I'm using springform cake pans here because I just find it so much easier to get the cake out at the end. These do not make very large cakes, so if you're looking for a thicker cake, you may only want to use 2 of these pans. Once the mixture is evenly distributed, you're then just going to want to smooth them out in the cake pans so that they make a nice level cake. You are then going to bake these at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 22 to 30 minutes. When they are done, you can take them out and let them thoroughly cool off before icing them. I left them for a good couple of hours before I started making my icing. So for this icing, it's actually going to be a whipped cream mixture. So you're going to take 2 cups of heavy whipping cream, and to that you're going to add 1/4 cup of powdered sugar and whip this up until it whips into a whipped cream with stiff peaks when you take the blender out. Set that bowl aside, and then you're going to take 2 pints of fresh strawberries and dice them up into small bits. Now you can use just sliced strawberries if you want. I prefer mine in smaller chunks. Again, saving those strawberry tops because there's so many uses for them. Once that's done, you're just going to set that bowl aside for now. I transferred my whipping cream to a separate bowl, and that way I had this big bowl to work with. I measured out 4 ounces of cream cheese, and to that I add in 1/2 cup of powdered sugar. And then I go ahead and blend this mixture until it is thoroughly combined. When that is done, you can take your whipped cream mixture and just slowly add it in, blending it in between. So I add in about 1 cup and then I blend it all together, and then I go ahead and add in the rest of it. This cream cheese added a certain tang to the whipped cream, and it was really, really enjoyable. To the strawberries, I also add a balsamic glaze, about 1 tablespoon of it here. This step is completely optional. If you do not want that balsamic glaze in, just go ahead and add in your fresh strawberries. So to your whipped cream mixture, you're going to add in about 1/2 cup of the strawberries, although I didn't find this absolutely necessary because you go ahead and add the strawberries on top of the whipped cream mixture anyways, so you can go ahead and skip that step if you'd like to. So I'm taking my bottom cake layer and I take this whipped cream mixture and I just evenly add a layer on here. I was a little afraid of afterwards having to cut it and having this whipped cream mixture kind of squirt out everywhere while I was cutting the cake, but this did not happen. So you can add a thicker layer of whipped cream if you like, because I did end up with a little bit of whipped cream at the end. So thicker layer of whipped cream in between the cake layers is totally fine. My daughter typically loves to help out with anything in the kitchen, so when she saw that I was doing this cake, she definitely wanted to take a part in it. So she came over to help do the layers on this cake. Once you have a layer of that whipped cream on your cake, you can go ahead and add a decent amount of the strawberries, about an even amount for each layer, so that you have a layer of cake, a layer of whipped cream, and then a layer of strawberries. To the top, I did add a generous amount of whipped cream and the rest of my strawberries. This cake was so delicious, so if you are having a summer party of any sort or just for the fun of making a cake, I highly suggest this one. It is the perfect summer dessert. If you're new here, I focus a lot on budget meals, frugal homemaking, and urban homesteading. So if that's something that interests you, make sure you follow along. I will link my budget meals playlist here, so if you're looking for more meal ideas, make sure you check them out. I have a lot there for you. Thank you so much for joining me today, guys. I hope you're doing well, and I'll see you all next time.